All right, guys. Hi, everyone. So let's get started. So before, I guess I start, any questions lingering from before? All right. So we technically now covered chapter 2 of the first book. Now we've already started chapter 6 of the other book as well. So for the remainder of the quarter, we're just going to focus on chapter 6. And as part of it, we're just going to go over PBFT and all the sort of the intricacy we talked about too. And if there's time, we get into a bit of an optimization. So it would be sort of a recap and then potential optimization for the next few sessions that we have together. It's, I think, already in week 8, almost week 8. All right. So again, the slides are also available online. So we're going to talk about the foundation. We're going to talk about speculation. We've already talked a little bit about elimination of the commit phase of PBFT, but we'll go over it again. And we'll look at a few other optimistic optimization as well too. Then we're going to look at how to linearize. So far we looked at quadratic communication, and then we're going to have a look at how do you linearize the communication as well too. If time, concurrent consensus, and maybe even something about the topology, some partial replication and sharding. So that's the wish list. Let's see how much of it we can do in the next week. All right. So you all should be familiar with this as a recap. So consensus, think of it as a black box, and replica communicate through this black box, and they decide on a value, and all the non-faulty replica will agree on the same value. So we have the non-divergence or the safety. So in each round of consensus, one value is decided by all non-faulty replica. You have the termination or liveness. Eventually, a value will be decided. So nothing bad happens. Eventually, something good happens. That's another way of saying it. There is validity. Again, some of these have been defined in different ways in different papers and texts. But one definition of validity is that a value that is decided upon is not arbitrary. There's an actual request by the client. So useful work is being done. There is the response, meaning that even if the consensus is safe, even the consensus is live, even the decision or the request on which we reach agreement on is valid, as long as the client doesn't receive the response, again, the system is somewhat not so useful. And then the service. And the service, one of the many definitions of service is that there's some notion of fairness. Eventually, every client can propose a value. So day one, this is day one stuff, questions. Hopefully now it makes more sense to you. All right. And then we talked about arbitrary fault model, in which part of it could be omission, failed stop, or a message loss. But the more important one is the commission, meaning equivocation of intent, or some arbitrarily decide to respond to some, not respond to others, potentially send conflicting messages, and all the above. So that's the arbitrary fault model, which also referred to as the Byzantine as well too. Okay. Questions? All right. So far we talked about the 3 sub-protocol. The most important one is the commitment one, which is allow a well-behaving leader, a coordinator, or primary to propose something, and an agreement is reached. And you go into 2 phases of all-to-all communication. The first phase we talked about is to ensure uniqueness or the integrity of the proposal. And then the second phase is the preservation, making sure a proposal that was uniquely proposed by a primary will be remembered forever. Yes? All clear? And if the commitment doesn't go well, then we have a faulty leader or a faulty network or unreliable network. Then we form another quorum analogous to the commitment quorum that help us to commit a transaction, we form a recovery corp, and allows us not only to preserve what was done previously, but also agree upon who the next leader is. So the recovery, as we talked about last time, in view of two property, it first does the view synchronization, agreeing on who the next primary is, and then does the state synchronization, recovering the proposal that was previously prepared or committed by in earlier views. Good question. Is it a good summary? All making sense now? Okay. And then the other protocol that we talked about is it's actually the only protocol that is decentralized, and it's really intended to restore the replica in dark. So once a replica reach a committed state, it tells everybody else, I'm committed. And if a checkpoint quorum is formed, meaning majority are not committed, then they can consider that commitment as stable, as checkpointed. They don't have to worry about it anymore because it's stable. That means the majority of replica have committed. Then we don't even need to worry about any transaction that has been checkpointed during our recovery, because the checkpoint says F+1 replica have non-faulty, at least F+1 non-faulty replica have committed this transaction. And this would also, through those F+1 non-faulty replica, eventually everybody else can learn it. So this allows us to reach the 2F+1 threshold. And if majority have already committed, then there's nothing to recover. So anything that is checkpointed, it no longer needs recovery. So this becomes an essential optimization. Otherwise, every time we did a view change, every time we did a recovery, we had to go to day one. And so if the chain is running for 5 years, 10 years, every recovery, that means going back 5 years, which is not possible. But if the checkpoint is done frequently, maybe even every 10 minutes, the recovery only needs to go back 10 minutes, which becomes a lot more practical. So the frequency of the checkpoint determines the length of a time that requires to recover the system. They go hand in hand, these two. Anybody who reaches a commitment, they could say, I mean, in the base case, every time you reach a commitment, you tell everybody I committed. In the same way that you told everybody you prepared, now you tell everybody committed. Now, as a replica, if I receive your message saying that you committed, you either give me a certificate proving that you actually did commit, or I wait for F+1 other replica. If F+1 replica say they're committed, then I know one of them is telling the truth, so I can also mark that as committed. And now I can also tell everyone I committed. So this way, all the non-faulty replica who were in dark, they can sort of get into the commitment.
So that's what happens when the non-faulty replica are actually reconnected.
Or maybe it's not just that they were reconnected, the leader or the network, or maybe especially the leader, weren't giving them the proposal. So they weren't participating in the actual prepare and commit. So this way now is a way for them to learn it. This recovery, if the new leader is malicious, it can still keep F good replica in dark, because the recovery only requires a quorum. So this is driven by a leader. And so if the leader, for example, doesn't send a message to the replica in dark, and it could still keep them in dark. But since this is sort of no longer leader-based, it's decentralized, everybody just telling everybody else I've committed. Since it's not driven by the leader, and so it doesn't have the same censorship property that any leader-based routine will have. A leader can censor a transaction, or it could just don't send that to everyone. But this checkpoint, since everybody's just on their own sending it and informing everyone, doesn't have that limitation. So this is actually the only way, through the checkpoint is the only way that we actually can get to this property of safety. In each round of consensus, only one value is decided by all non-faulty replica. Through the normal consensus, the only thing that we can hope is that the majority of a replica learn the value. But through the checkpoint, we can get to the point that all the non-faulty replica will learn the value. Okay. So three routine, so commitment to build a new proposal, agree on the new proposal. Recovery is to preserve an already agreed upon proposal or a candidate or a committable or agreeable proposal. That's a recovery. So this is for future, this is for past, and this is also a decentralized way of propagating that commitment within the network without the help of a leader. Yes.
You mentioned that it's possible that you include a true transaction, but that transaction is not preserved or committed by others, and this replica just added to the recovery state and confirmed by the
Mhm.
So will this kind of transaction be under resolution?
If the new primary, I mean, you could include it, you could inject it, if everybody agree upon it and you run a consensus on it and everybody accept it, then it will be preserved. By merely, I put it into my view change and the new primary includes it in the new view, it's not preserved yet. Because you can think of when the primary sends a new view, it's almost like sending a new proposal. So now first it needs to be prepared and then committed. So the new view message itself, we didn't talk about it. We just say, here is the new view and whether the new view is valid or not. But that new view needs to be prepared and it also needs to be committed. It needs to be prepared because as we talked for this very example, the new view doesn't necessarily is unique. Because for example, one primary could just say null or one primary could put some transaction, the example that you said. So a new view, even if it's valid, supported by a quorum, it's not necessarily unique for that very reason. So first, once the new primary proposes the new view, everybody needs to prepare it, send the prepare message, and everybody needs to commit it, send the commit message. At that point, the new view is committed, and the new primary can go to a new round, propose something in the new round. So the new view needs to be unique and needs to be preserved. And if a transaction was sort of injected, let's say at that time, somewhere that was null, there was nothing really was agreed upon, and the primary said, well, this was the request that maybe was proposed, but was never prepared by anyone. So that can be accepted as part of the new view, but then once it's prepared and once it's committed, then at that point, it will be preserved. So if now after that point, there's another view change, that request, that sort of questionable request will be preserved. Yes. They can do what? What do you mean by retract? Reject, yes. If, for example, if the new view is not, for example, if the primary just lies, doesn't provide an actual proof for what the transaction that was done before, it has to provide the proof for it. And the proof is, it basically just collects all the view change messages received, and that's its proof for the view that is, the new view that is proposing. So if that new view doesn't match the quorum of view change messages, then they could reject it. So everybody validates the new view. So a non-faulty primary constructs a valid view given a set of view change messages. Replica validates the view given the set of view change messages that the primary is referencing.
besides the which preserved message it's gonna propose.
Well, the one thing that has to decide for anything that was committed, there's no choice because it has to show a proof set of view change messages, 2f plus 1 view change messages as a proof for this new view. And if in that 2f plus 1 view change messages, people are saying I prepared it, then it has to prepare it. There's no escaping it. So based on what it receives, it constructs a valid view, and then it proposes it. And those view change messages is the proof of what it's proposing. So if there was only one replica, you were the only one who prepared, as a new primary, I can just collect a whole bunch of view change messages that doesn't include you. And I say nothing happened. And that's also valid because majority didn't prepare it. So that means that transaction that even though you prepared it, it's okay to exclude because majority didn't prepare it. That means it wasn't committed. So it's okay to drop it. And so now there could be a primary, or I could have maybe created one proof which included you, or I could create another proof that didn't include you. Both of them are valid. But now the new view is no longer unique. So that means you need to prepare it to ensure uniqueness. So you need to ensure the uniqueness. So as a malicious primary, I don't send half of the class with you being in its prepare that show that you're in the quorum. And I say, okay, you guys prepare this. And I send another quorum to the other half saying, well, nothing happened, don't prepare anything. So now I could equivocate. So in just like any other request that we always prepare and commit, the view change, as part of the view change, once the primary proposes the new view, you need to prepare and then you need to commit. You need to make sure it's unique and you also need to preserve it. Yes.
So it's the committable message, non-committable message is to be dropped. Why don't the primary just only preserve message to this code?
Well, again, first of all, you don't know exactly if it was committable or not. Because no, but maybe in your view, so let's say this side of the class had prepared it, okay? And half of this side also prepared it. So in total, there were 12 plus 1 prepared. But all of a sudden, most of these folks are no longer reachable. You construct a quorum and doesn't have 12 plus 1. But so you may think, oh, there's no 12 plus 1, so it couldn't have been committed. But that doesn't mean you saw every message. So you can't conclude whether it was committable or not. Because even those who have prepared it, maybe they were malicious. They don't tell you anymore that they prepared it. So you cannot just say, oh, I'm going to collect 12 plus 1, and only if I collect 12 plus 1, then I'm going to propose it. Because as we said, if 12 plus 1 have prepared, the guarantee is how many prepared messages are we going to get in a recovery quorum? Just one. That's the guarantee. So even if you see a single prepared, then that could have been committed. Because F node are lying, they no longer say they prepared. F nodes in dark, you had 12 plus 1 who actually prepared it.
Why we should care about the dark instead of just only consider the retreat?
No, but the client have already got committed. So the client, there were 12 plus 1 who have prepared, okay? And out of these 12 plus 1, let's say he received the commit message. He told the client I'm committed. All the faulty replica also told the client I'm committed. So as far as the client is concerned, the message is committed. 12 plus 1 had prepared. Now we do the view change. He's not accessible. These guys were faulty. They say nothing happened. And the other F who had also said prepared, they're no longer reachable either. So now you say one person says prepared, and you think, okay, maybe I just drop it. But there was a commit. If you drop it, now you have divergence. You sure?
So it's like I drop it and I make a new view change. The new view gets to that replica. Is that
Doesn't matter if it gets to that replica or not. Client have already accepted it. You're saying, so it's kind of saying you told the client, so you took the money of the client, $20,000, and you're supposed to send it a car, and now you don't send the car because you dropped it. So the transaction was done. The client is gone.
there is the client doesn't commit that he send that car.
Well, I mean, those it could happen, but in general, client is gone. So as far as you told the client, I committed. So now if you change that, irrespective of what the client does, we're not changing our commitment. So that's violates the commitment. The moment you make a commitment and you later drop it, that's the violation of that commitment. You committed to something. If you drop it, you violated your promise. Okay, think about it. Any other questions? So these are good questions. And now, since you know a lot more, you can ask deeper questions. Good? All right. So just to recap, consensus operates in rounds, and that simplifies it. So in each round, a new value, a new client message is proposed by the primary and gets committed with the commitment protocol. And since I am the primary and I kind of say what's the next transaction, in a sense, everybody is converging into my view because these are the this is my view, these are the transaction I see, and everybody converges or everybody agrees on my view. So that's why leader's view is what everybody begin to agree upon. And that's why when we do the view change, that means we go to a new leader and now we see the system through someone else's eyes, through someone else's view. So that's kind of the intuition why they use the word view. At least that's my justification for it. Make sense? Yeah, so that's how we said. And then we said that as well. So if protocol stalls, commitment stalls, we do view change. And periodically, we also do checkpointing, and that helps with replicas in Doc. So they're complementary. The view change and checkpoints is serve two different purposes. So the checkpoint allows to bring faulty the non-faulty replica in dark, and it also helps to optimize the view change. Is checkpoint protocol necessary?
Yeah. Let's say one. So it's offline. Networking then comes back to serve.
So if there's no checkpoint, are you gonna get a safety flaw or a safety violation without checkpoint? Without the checkpoint protocol, do we get a safety violation?
Just start from the beginning.
We need to start from the beginning, so we don't get safety violation, but we also don't get the strong safety. The strong safety kind of said that not majority, the strong safety says all the non-faulty replica learn about the new value. But when we kind of been doing everything that we've been doing, we were just happy with F+1, just the majority of non-faulty replica to be aware of it. So it's not that we break the safety, but sort of a weaker safety. And the checkpoint help us to get that strong safety. Of course, you would eventually get a strong safety if you do enough view change. Eventually, the network is good and there's one good primary and tells everyone. So you could eventually get to strong safety as well too. But in general, this is optimization. So it's not essential. You could remove it, but if you were to remove it, then the protocol is no longer practical in terms of its implementation because just the view change will take forever to complete. So if you run the system for 5 years, now you need to do 5 years of replaying the whole history. So it's no longer practical. It's not going to be a practical protocol. And it also, it will be a huge overhead because for anything that you haven't checkpointed, you also need to keep around the signatures, the messages that everyone sent, certificates. So you need to keep a lot of additional material, additional data as well to be able to remember the prepared state, the commit state, and there's a lot of additional overhead as well that needs to be remembered. So there's memory overhead, and there's also just takes a long time to go prepare everything, repeat the whole history. That's configurable, so depends how fast you want your recovery.
What triggers it? Is it just like the leaders that would get time to checkpoint?
No, it's not the leader. You don't trust the leader. So the checkpoint could be for every 100 round, everybody trigger checkpoints. You could agree on it before, so it could be a system parameter. Everybody knows it. And in fact, once we kind of learn a little bit, we maybe get to it in later slide, is that so far we talked about this notion of a round and we just assume there's a single round that's happening. But in reality, I could initiate multiple rounds. So for example, for you to prepare my request 2 for round 2, you don't need to commit, you don't need to wait to commit the first one. So you could kind of go out of order, do out of order processing. And now, if we just allow arbitrary out of order processing, then a malicious leader will just always propose something. Maybe it just doesn't propose anything for the first slot. And so ordering is going at a very fast rate. Nothing is being executed because the first slot is still empty. And so usually you put a bound on how many out of order proposal leader can do, let's say 100, to make sure there's no intentional empty holes. And usually at those boundaries do your checkpoint too. But again, it's a parameter. You could have just decided to checkpoint every 5,000 rounds. And also, it wouldn't hurt if just everybody arbitrarily decide at some point they want to do their checkpoint. So eventually, he decides on round 5. She says on round 7. So when she does checkpoint for round 7, it means she's done 5 and 6 as well too. And eventually, somebody else does 8, somebody else does 10. Eventually, enough will be formed, and we say round 5 is done. So maybe our conclusion of what's the stable checkpoint is like behind, but you don't even need any of that. It will sort of work well. But normally, you can also just have a parameter saying every 100 rounds, I'm going to invoke my checkpoint. Other questions? So I don't know if you remember this. I said this is a very easy protocol, just 2 phases, prepare and commit, but there's a lot of complexity. So there's a lot of, maybe not complexity, there's a lot of intricacy in that very simple protocol. So what we talked about, this is a Paxos, this is a crash tolerance. But what we talked about, a new view change, and new view. So this is essentially a leader replacement. Then we propose, prepare, commit. This is our commitment. And then we execute. If you were to simplify this protocol to only support crash tolerance as opposed to arbitrary fault, then first of all, we don't need prepare because this prepare was to ensure the uniqueness and the integrity of the proposal. If you're kind of using Raft or Paxos or for crash tolerant protocol, you don't really need this because you assume the primary is not malicious. So it's not going to equivocate. So the uniqueness is no longer needed. And also the commitment doesn't need to be all to all because we do an all to all to make sure we're not kind of relying on the leader and everybody sharing their state. But the crash tolerant, you can kind of trust the primary. As long as the primary collects enough votes of commit, it will be honest and send it out. So you can drop a phase and you can also reduce the communication complexity if you were to do only crash tolerant protocol. Till up to recently, the only sort of replication protocol or fault tolerant protocol that has been extensively used in industry is that first variant. A lot of sort of Facebook, Google, and these companies, especially in the 2000 range, they've deployed Paxos a lot in many of their both the data storage and also their transactional layer. For example, Google Spanner, which I think I actually just saw an article on it. They support, I don't know, 50 exabyte or something of a storage. So the data is terabytes, petabyte, and in exabytes, some orders of exabytes. And then also they do 5 billion transactions per second across all Google. So the spanner does use Paxos for replication. Their replication factor is usually low, maybe 3 to 5. But that Zookeeper and many other, or Chubby, or there's a bunch of protocol and sort of replication services, key services, log services that are distributed layers about Google, Facebook, and these companies, they all use Paxos. But nobody have really these blockchain company, nobody have really got into this because it's just a lot more complex. And the argument was, well, is it really needed or not? And some of blockchain, not only it's more complex, they're talking about hundreds of nodes or even potentially thousands of replication factor, versus the industry, when they do replication, mostly at the storage layer, they do 3 or 5. So orders of magnitude lower replication factor. I mean, I'm sure Dropbox, for example, uses under the hood Paxos like protocol to ensure its fault tolerance replication as well too. Probably their own optimized version, but they will be using fault tolerant replication. Questions? All right. So commitment, leader base, again, two essential thing we talked about is the prepared core. So once the replica established, the majority have received the same value, you can validate its integrity, and you can also say it's unique, and there was no equivocation. So that was the prepared core. Then we have the commit core. So that means the majority have prepared, the majority have observed the proposal is unique, the majority have observed the proposal is locked. And once the commitment quorum is constructed, we have agreement. And once we have an agreement, means that we can ensure the preservation. All good? Yes. Sure. Yes, just crash tolerance. Yeah, so and then the set intersection property that we've been talking about for a long time is that two forms will both intersect on at least one non-faulty replica. So if I were to form a commitment quorum, then I know that the majority have prepared, and any subsequent recovery quorum will at least have one node in common with the commitment quorum. And that means there will be at least one person, one replica that will say, wait a minute, something was prepared, and that will be preserved. So again, kind of back to the discussion that we had earlier. Yes? Okay. Okay, so the most important thing I would say in PBFT is that the progress is made. The protocol is live if and only if a quorum is constructed, a quorum is formed. And so that gives us liveness. And the safety is that all possible quorums, all possible valid quorums intersect over one replica. That gives us safety. But the most important thing I would say is that you only make progress if a quorum is formed. And if a quorum is formed, then it guarantees its safety because any other future quorum will ensure that it intersects with this quorum that was just formed. So once the commit form is quorum, the commitment quorum is formed, and we guarantee that any future recovery quorum will have at least one node in their intersection. This is another most important one, which is kind of more concise way of saying what was said before. Consensus will install indefinitely until the quorum is formed. This is applicable to basically all form of consensus. It will install indefinitely unless a quorum is formed. So what does that mean? To our conversation last week, consensus will install indefinitely unless a quorum is formed. What is the implication of that? Continuously sending what kind of a message? Or the same message? And so no step is taken until a quorum is, unless there's a quorum is endorsing it. And as you said, that goes into that retransmission, which I have it coming up in a few slides. So this is kind of what we talked about already. We kind of had switched into this. So if there is detection failure, replica get into the view change. And once the replica observe that the majority have requested the view change, this becomes the synchronization point. And once the new leader also observes that the majority have requested the view change and named this primary as the leader, then it put these view change messages together and construct a new view and proposes the new view. Yes. And this is the question that I've asked many of you in the past, especially the older crowd. It's in the chapter, but or in the slides, but nobody for some reason didn't look at it. What happens if a replica times out after sending its view change message, but before observing a quorum? What would happen if a replica times out after observing the recovery quorum? So what happens if a replica times out after sending its view change, before observing a recovery quorum? What would happen if a replica times out after observing the recovery quorum? And this was there too, for everybody who was supposed to read chapter 6. And these are actually the exact text from the book too. The solution is very simple, yet powerful. As long as the recovery quorum is not formed, the timeout replica will indefinitely retransmit its view change message, as if time stops. Because time would only advances when quorum is formed. That's the connection between time and energy. You don't get a quorum, you retransmit. If you get a quorum, you move on. If you don't get a quorum, you stall, you retransmit. Once you get a quorum, that's become the synchrony point of retransmission. You retransmit this until you hear from everyone. Or from the majority. Once you heard from the majority, now it's safe to take a step. And that's every step of the protocol, whether it's recovery, whether it's commitment, whether it's checkpoint, all of it, it happens. Of course, we don't do retransmit in the checkpoint. Well, we do a little bit in the checkpoint. We don't normally do retransmit in the commitment. We fall back into the recovery, and in the recovery, we do the retransmission. So as opposed to, and do you know why we do that? Why don't we just do retransmission in the commitment? Yes. So this retransmission, this very simple retransmission, we will only do it as part of the view change that was shown in the previous figure. Why don't we do retransmission during the commitment? Or just do retransmission anytime we're kind of getting stalled? Why don't we just always do retransmit in the same state that we are, keep our state and just do retransmission? Why don't we do that? As opposed to we just do the retransmission as part of the view change. The other phase is that, for example, I haven't got a prepare message, I haven't got a commit message, I haven't got a proposal from a primary. Why don't I just resending my request saying, I prepared. So for example, I got let's say a simple one. I got a message from the primary, the proposal, and the proposal looks good. I send my prepare message. And everybody else maybe does it too, or maybe they don't, I don't know, but I don't receive a form. Why don't I retransmit my prepare message over and over again? Because right now, we don't retransmit our prepare message, we don't retransmit our commit message, we simply time out and go to view change. We only apply this mechanism as part of the view change. Oh no, you're sending your prepare message to others.
Yeah, but like if you're not going into the view change state.
Yeah, so that could be, that's a good one. It's also that different people will get stuck in a different point. And so you could get deadlock and stuff. So, but this is a common place. We push everybody into the state of the view change and we resynchronize in a single common predefined state of the view change. As opposed to trying to be different people, different replica at a different state, trying to retransmit because some of them may have been moved on. And so it may work, but this is a lot simpler and cleaner. I mean, there may be complexity. I haven't thought about trying to retransmit in other phases, but this is a lot simpler. You default into one single point of time synchrony, which is part of the view change, and only on that point, you indefinitely retransmit. So the network condition becomes favorable, and until you finally get a replica, get a next primary that is responding. Or you construct your quorum and you move on to another primary. And so most of the asynchronous protocol, so now this is a very powerful tool and it allows you to do message loss and message drop because we get stuck in this view change and retransmit. So as long as the network is dropping, we retransmit. And we say eventually the network becomes stable, doesn't drop messages, and the protocol can make progress. But most of the asynchronous protocol don't have this phase. And they also cannot have this phase because the asynchronous protocol says, as we talked about, if you remember, the asynchronous protocol said that there's no bounded on the delay. The delay could be 5 seconds, could be 5 hours, could be 5 years. So we don't even know when to retransmit. So then we have to assume that when we deal with these asynchronous protocol with no predefined or no bounded delay or no known bounded delay, then there shouldn't be any message loss because we don't have any mechanism to decide when is the time to retransmit, when is the time to just wait. Questions? All right. And so this is what we talked about last time kind of too, is that it's possible that we initiate our view change and then we get, so this one, it was the first one who initiated view change. It never got to the time synchrony because let's say the message for this one arrived late, it never got to that point, and so retransmits. So it kind of retransmits if it hasn't got the view synchronization. But eventually it gets enough view change messages, and that point becomes time sync. It gets synchronized. And now the new primary will propose the new view. But now if the new view itself arrives late, these two replica who had synchronized, they were waiting, let's say, for this green period for the new view to arrive, but it didn't arrive. So they time out again, and now they try to go yet to another view. So even if this was a valid primary, proposed a valid new view, but if it took too long to arrive, it could be rejected or it could be denied the ability to become a leader. And so they time out, and the new one, and once this leader R1 receives enough messages saying that they all have detected failure, itself says, okay, I also time out, I also join the view change message. And then now all the nodes again resynchronize for the next primary in line R2. And at that point, R2 also synchronize, send a new view, and now everyone switches to the new view because the new view also arrives in a timely fashion. So retransmit becomes eligible to receive the new view or eligible to be timed out from this current view. And they do get timed out. They do another view change, go to the next primary. They view synchronize, new primary, finally send the new view in a timely manner. And they all can join the view of R2. The view of P failed, view of R1 is too slow, and finally view R2 prevails. Yes.
Like right now, like not the primary, I choose the primary.
At this point, yeah.
When we not the primary, it's like let's say I actually got a message from the client and send messages for both actors.
As everybody ignores it. If you haven't officially accepted the new view message, you essentially said, I detect a failure with this, and you know from this point on, when they consider a failure detection of R1, they're no longer going to accept anything. They're not going to have anything to do with R1 anymore.
If you look at partnership by R2, client, and then if I propose and then like does other replica still consider the error message or the message from the original primary like R1 or P as the like message, or just ignore everything?
So anything that was committed, but let's say by P, should be preserved in these green arrows.
New transaction.
Yeah, so once they are preserved, after that preservation is complete, then R2 will propose new proposal. So it won't propose anything new until it has preserved the past.
Yeah, so like after you propose it, like after the like during like the propose the prepare and like get message from every other. So like would you guys still be listening to like all one at least at the time?
No, they're no longer the leader. There's only one leader. No, you listen to them, you accept their prepare message. Oh yeah, for sure. Because again, maybe neither P or R1 were faulty. You don't know because their messages were delayed. The network was delayed. Yeah, I serve as a primary. Once he's the primary, I'm now act as a replica. And once he gives up his being primary, he's a primary, then both of us continue to act as a replica until go be around, I become a primary, and so forth. Any other question? All right. Very nice.